Hello, Movie Crusaders, and welcome to our latest Decades of Horror. I am Sean Waskerud. With me, as always, is Brian Michaels. If you're following through us, you got through the 80s. We are now into the 90s. If you guys have not watched the first episode, feel free to go back, check out that 80s episode. It is a really, really good one. But now we are in the 1990s, and as Brian said at the tail end of the 80s, 90s was kind of a dark time for horror. It was almost literally, as a horror saying, dying out until a new wave of horror was coming through. What would you say was kind of the, not necessarily the breaking point, but why do you agree with me on the whole aspect of it dying in the 90s?
I think that, like we talked about in the 80s, how it kind of became the VHS era and video stores and a lot of straight to video, horror movies. Because horror is one of those things that can really be done low budget. That's why a lot of directors, their first movie is usually, even actors who become directors, a lot of their first ones is a horror movie because it's something that they can do that, can be done at a relatively low budget. The problem is because of the straight to video kind of thing, there's just so much horror coming out that so many of them aren't good. There are good ones in there too, but there's just the sheer quantity of bad ones coming out kind of overwhelm the good ones. At the same time, you have the slashers, which came to prominence in the 80s. Or getting tired because by the time you get to Friday the 13th Part 8 or Nightmare on Elm Street Part 6 or whatever, it's like, okay, this is getting kind of repetitive. There's kind of nothing new happening. It's getting old. We're looking for what's going to be the next step in horror. So I think it was like there was a little bit of a step down in quality, but I think there was a big step down in interest in the kind of horror movies that were being made by the time you hit the early 90s.
Yeah, I agree because much like we said. I mean, if you look at the franchises that were born in the 80s, you had Halloween, which started technically in 78, but was riding through the 80s. Honestly, if you think the Halloween movies are good, you're lying to yourself because they're not. Most of the Halloween movies are bad, and it got to the point where I don't think anyone really cared about the Halloween films outside of the first two. Same thing with, like I said, Freddy. They started to go super comedic and schlocky. They started to look like shells of themselves. Like, I remember going back and rewatching the latest Nightmare on Elm Streets. I was doing like a complete rewatch, and it was a chore to get through the last few. Friday the 13th, yes, it's kind of the same thing. Here's Freddy. He's an unstoppable force. You can't really stop him. Yes, you can throw little things here and there, like him going to Manhattan, but it's like, but why? Other than just like, is it the Muppets? Like, what are we doing here? Why are we adding like little, things to Jason to make him relevant? Child's Play only had 3 movies and then it ended. There wasn't really a staple of horror anymore. Even like I said, Evil Dead. You got one Evil Dead in the 90s, and then that was done. There was not a flagship of horror through this. It was just a bunch of people trying to copy what worked in the 80s with a lesser budget, and they didn't work, or they weren't considered good. You would have the occasional ones that would actually like hit the market, like, oh, that's actually pretty good, but they never built on into a franchise or sequels. It was just kind of one-offs and stuff like that. And so it wasn't until 95, 96 that horror decided we need to change. We need to do something different.
Well, I mean, I feel like the horror genre was kind of, they were grasping at things. They were trying to bring new things in, because even I think they knew that, like, okay, the old slasher thing, while it can still be done well, is getting old and people want something new. So it's like, I think there were a couple main trends. One trend you saw is that they started trying to reach back again into the catalog of like the old Universal monsters. They came out with Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. They tried to go back
Wolf.
And Wolf, and then by the end of the decade, you're doing Mummy as well. And it's kind of like, okay, well, let's try and go back to those old classics and see if those hit. And they were, they were hit and miss. Some worked, some didn't, to different extents. But it wasn't gonna, revive the horror genre. It was just kind of, one-off films. The other thing was especially after Jurassic Park hit in '93, you had this huge boom of horror movies that loved their CGI. Because they're like, oh, we can do anything. We can show any kind of creatures. We can do whatever in CGI. The problem is most of them weren't ready for it. If you go back and look at them, there's a lot of really bad, really obvious CGI. And like I talked about in the last episode, to some extent, you forgive it. Like, this is the limits of special effects right now. And not every movie can be Jurassic Park. Not everything can look photorealistic. But there's a lot of it that's like, I don't think you guys were ready to try to use this yet because it didn't
Yeah,
work.
it's literally like that Jurassic Park quote. You know, you guys were so focused on that you didn't realize that you should, or that
Yeah.
it's just like just because you can doesn't mean that should be the way it
And
is.
part of the problem was that they couldn't because not every effects house was ready to be ILM. They couldn't do Jurassic Park level effects. They were like, "Oh, we can do computer generated." Like, no, you can't.
Nope, and we're too far into it now, so we're just gonna have to come out with what we got to come out.
Yeah.
And it was just, and like I don't consider Jurassic Park horror by any means, so I will not have Jurassic Park on my list during this. But it was just, and that was the other thing too. It was just like, yes, like everyone wanted to do that, but the problem is like you said, no one was good at it. So then it was just fail after fail after fail, and then you had the people who, like I said, were like you have the camp that's just doing the same old shit. You have the camp who's trying to do the new tech, who's not ready for the new tech, and then you had the people who were just making horror for a cheap buck, and who was like, well, let's throw a horror out there. People will pay to see it, and it got to the point where people were getting a little bit smarter with their movie watching experience, and it was because the 80s were so good. People kind of got I don't want to say snobby with their horror, but they were just like, I'll just go back and rewatch the same old horror shit, not watch whatever this new crap is, because it wasn't working. Nothing about it was working. And it got kind of almost to the point where, like you said, horror almost died. Much like how the spoof movies died. It just got to the point where everyone was doing it. It was cheap. It was bad. It wasn't funny. And then it's just, there was no money behind it anymore. Horror, there was still some money, but even as cheap as we were making these movies, the ones that were the most expensive were not making their money back. And so you were starting to have studios lose confidence in the horror movies that people wanted to make, that they weren't able to make the movies they wanted to. So either they just didn't happen, or they had to make a lesser than version of it, which naturally would bomb. And it wasn't until, like I said, in the mid 90s when it wasn't, we don't need flashy CGI or special effects to make a horror good. We just need good writing and concepts of it. And that is what, 80s had decent writing, but they had phenomenal practical effects and good ideas to go around the 80s, which is why the 80s worked so well. That's why the franchises were built upon. That's why all this, because you had a cool concept, you had decent writing, but you had imaginative and well done kills with effective gore and practical gore. And in the 90s, you could do that, but it just didn't work. But the writing is what saved horror in the mid 90s. Mainly meta is what saved the 90s, which meta, still back then, meta was still an unknown term. I don't think anyone really understood meta probably until the 2000s. I don't think they were watching it and they were liking it, but I don't think they understood what meta was until the 2000s. Because wouldn't you say, or would you agree or disagree that if it wasn't for Wes Craven, horror probably would have died in the 90s?
I don't think horror would ever be completely dead, and something else would pop up. But as far as what saved it for the 90s, that the thing that did pivot it was Scream. Scream came out in 1996, and it kind of it reinvented horror. It kind of reinvigorated it too, because for good and for bad, which I'll get into. But because I mean, the writing was super creative, the dialogue was great. It worked as the comedy in it totally worked, but it was definitely still, first and foremost, it was a horror movie. It was still a slasher flick, but it took something new to it. It put the twist on it with that meta commentary kind of on the horror genre. It called out all the stupid, silly things that happen in every single horror film and how things had become so cliche and repetitive and predictable. And it took those kind of aspects of it and it acknowledged them, but it still managed to be a good horror movie.
Yeah, it was, and I will say this, even in that was like New Nightmare was the first one, but people weren't quite ready for it. It was like, oh, that's a unique take on what you're doing with this. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we're ready for it. And then, and that's because people were used to Freddy being Freddy, and you're doing a completely new take on Freddy, which now you watch it, you're like, oh, this is fucking brilliant. But people were used to comedic, Freddy Krueger, and not like, no, this Freddy Krueger's not funny. This Freddy Krueger is just a straight killer like we saw in the first Nightmare on Elm Street. But that was the starting point of the meta-ness of what led to Scream. New Nightmare had to walk so Scream could run. And but Scream, the reason why Scream worked as well and where New Nightmare did it was because it didn't have Freddy. It was brand new. It started fresh. You had a young, hot, talented cast around that crew, and they were able to take this new concept, like you said, was call out the bullshit that horror movies are, not necessarily change it, but just be aware and call it out while still doing it, but you're aware of it. And it was more or less like, look, they're still doing the same shit, but they're basically letting you know, hey, we're doing it, and we know that we're doing it, but you're still going to enjoy what we're doing. And that's why
it was one of those things where you also took the characters in the movie, and the characters were living in a world where horror movies exist. Because in every other movie in slasher flicks, just like people are just like, we're just living with these killers in the loose. And these are people who are living in the world that we are. We're like, we are aware of horror movies. We know
we've watched these movies that we watched.
Know what always happens, but we're stupid and we make all those same mistakes anyway.
Exactly, and that's why the '90s worked. And then once that happened, you started to see a tonal shift. And you still had your movies who still went way too CGI heavy, and you still had the same stuff that was going on. But now we had, well, hell, if you actually add just some really good fucking writing to these horror films, people are going to watch this more because it's just enjoyable to watch, And like I said, Scream was the birth child of what New Nightmare started with Wes Craven. Did it oversaturate eventually going into 2000s? Yes, because everything always does eventually, because everyone just wants to copy and paste.
Oh yeah, after Scream came out, especially when it worked in a video store, I was well aware of it, because every single cover in the horror section looked the same. It all had like the lineup of the pretty cast, and because there were so many copycats, and some were good, many were not, but they all tried to copy that formula, because you had like this. It was like teens or 20-somethings. It was always kind of a, instead of just being like this undead killer like Jason, or this, creature like Freddy who's coming out of your dreams, it was always like a whodunit. It was all, there was a human killer out there, and whether it was, Scream and its own sequels, I know, which did last summer, even the later Halloween movies kind of they had the same look to it. Urban Legend, on and on and on. Phantoms. There's just so many movies that like had that same look. They were totally trying to cash in on it. And like I said, some were good, but many were not.
Yeah, I said we praised Scream for what it did, but I know what you did last summer. It was right there with them. Those both came out.
Also, Kevin Williamson written.
What's that?
Also written by the same guy, Kevin Williamson.
Exactly. Like I said, and we praised Wes Craven, but Kevin Williamson is just as needs to be just as acknowledged for what Wes Craven did, because Kevin Williamson was the one who wrote Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, because those both came out, and those are like the perfect 1-2 punch.
And the Faculty in the next.
And the Faculty, which I definitely will be talking about. These were movies that, once again, were aware of the world that they were in. The killers were, unknowns. They weren't monsters. They're regular human beings. They weren't superhuman. They might look like they were superhuman because of what they're doing, but then you realize, oh, there's two killers, or there's this or that, and they brought more realism to the horror. It wasn't like, oh, here's this werewolf, here's this killer, sleep demon, here's this kid who died at a camp and then turned into a fucking juggernaut and couldn't be killed. These killers were more realistic, and killers that you could buy as being that person that lives down the street, or that guy that rents every horror film at the video store. That guy could easily be Ghostface. Yes. This guy who got wronged by these teens, yeah, he probably would want to get revenge on them. He's not, demonic or anything. He's just a dad who wants revenge, or a son who wants revenge. The killers were more believable, and by that believability, made them scarier, because they were people that you could see your everyday lives, and you could buy that these people could do the shit that these people are doing in these movies. And that's where horror transitioned to a point. You'd still have your monster or slasher films, but now the slasher films were not Freddy Krueger. They were Joe and Bob, who wanted to be famous, and that's what they did it, which made sense, even more by today's standards. People doing stupid shit because they want to, views and TikToks and all this kind of crap. And by doing that, it started this new horror storm, and horror was cool again all of a sudden. And then that led into the 2000s, but the 2000s, once again, it got tired by the time we got into the 2000s, and then they had to go a different route. That's why horror's always having to evolutionize and change, because once something works for horror, it gets beaten to death with 1,000 versions of it and remakes, to the point that like it could be a year or two later, and all of a sudden that's an old hat and it doesn't work anymore. You got to come up with a newer version of horror. You got to come up with a new idea. Superhero movies, a lot of them, they're the same thing. It's when they do something different that makes those horror movies stand out. Horror continually has to reimagine itself and reinvent itself to be unique and new and different. And 90s was the start of doing that. 80s was the start of the slasher franchises, and 90s was the meta realism of the horror. And that's kind of where it was. But like I said, you had that 5 years there in the early 90s where it's like, the horror just wasn't fun. It definitely wasn't a bright spot. It definitely wasn't something you enjoyed watching. You'd find the occasional one here or there that would, hit up, make a mark. But once 96 hit, horror was everywhere. It was the cool thing to watch and be a part of. So going into that, and when I go into this, I'll have another, trend that'll start when I get into it. But what were your, as much as we're praising it, what was your overrated horror films of the 90s?
There were two that jumped to mind. They're the first things I thought of when I think of overrated horror, and not even necessarily of the decade, but possibly of all time, since we skipped the 70s.
I feel like we're going to have the same one.
And they both came out in the same year. They both came out in 1999. One of those is The Sixth Sense. The Sixth Sense is a decent movie. Kind of started off the whole Shyamalan thing of, the big twist at the end. And the problem is there's really not that much more to the movie than the twist. And everyone likes to say, oh, I knew it was coming. And maybe you did, because they did drop hints along the way. But a lot of people say they knew and they didn't know unless they'd heard about something ahead of time. Or the other problem is a lot of people say, oh, there's a big twist at the end. So you spend the whole movie trying to figure out what the twist is going to be.
You start deciphering it because you're told to decipher it beforehand.
Right. So, but if you're just watching the movie not thinking there's a twist, you're not going to think about it. My thing is the movie is largely just very slow. It's very boring. Bruce Willis, who, especially in the 90s, I love Bruce Willis. But he's playing it just so, monotone and muted, which is maybe part of the character, but it's just like, it just makes the movie kind of slow and boring. And then when it comes to the twist, you're kind of like, oh, okay, that's interesting, but it's not enough to make me go, oh my God, it just blows my mind. So yeah, Sixth Sense was one of those for me that it went on to make, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, huge hit. Of course, doomed us to years more of Shyamalan making, very hit and miss movies, more misses than hits. So yeah, that's overrated for me.
Yeah, you all know how I feel about M. Night Shyamalan. But yeah, that movie literally made the money that it made because of the twist. And horror movies don't need twists. If they've got one that works, like this one, it did work, then that's great. But then once one hit happens, like 80 other movies are going to try to do the same exact thing, and they're not going to work as well as the other one. The other big trend that started in the same year, which I know this is going to be your other one, was the found footage genre. Yep. Now, for what it was, when it came out, found footage was a new, unique approach. They were finding something new and different, and you know what? It was effective for what it was. But god damn it, as effective as it was, it's an annoying experience to watch. There are certain films that figured out the formula and figured out a good way to do it, but that won't be until the 2000s when they finally figured it out. But this one was nauseating with shaky cam, and that's the Blair Witch Project. I'll admit, I watched the Blair Witch Project for the very first time at like 2 o'clock in the morning with the lights out in my house, and I had like a open, like my backyard was kind of woodsy. So did the aesthetics of where I lived make Blair Witch Project creepy for me? Sure. But you watch that any other time of the day. It's annoying. The actors are atrocious. They overact like crazy. And guess what? Nothing fucking happens in this movie. There's nothing in this film. There's that one moment where they go, what the fuck is that? Pan, tree. You never actually see anything in the fucking film. The ending is super effective. I will give it that. The ending is effective as shit. But this movie was so fucking annoying. And it's not good. It's annoying because people actually thought this fucking movie was real, which guess what? That's what you set out to do, and it fucking worked. I commend them for doing what they did. I commend them for pulling it off. But my God, you started something that was one of the most annoying trends for the next like 10 years. And none of them, outside of one franchise, even though I know Brian's not a fan of the franchise, and I'm definitely going to be talking about it in the 2000s. But even then, the way they did it worked 1,000 times better than how Blair Witch worked. And guess what? You know how I know Blair Witch didn't work? Because every other film after that did not follow that same formula. Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows, one of the worst fucking pieces of shit films I've ever seen. They shot that like a regular fucking movie. They didn't do the found footage thing of it. But Blair Witch is 90 minutes of nothing. There's really nothing to this fucking film. And it made a shitload of money. But tell me what in this movie is actually scary. It's just three idiots running through the woods screaming at nothing in the dark. And I know this is your other film, is it not?
This is absolutely my other film, and I will argue that your other franchise you're talking about is just as bad, but that's a discussion for another day. Blair Witch Project, when it came out, right before it came out, I'm in my mid-20s. I'm in the middle, I'm prime age for the, film bro community kind of thing, super into movies. I remember the time it came out. I remember the first time we saw the poster for it, which is kind of the creepy wood shot, and it kind of talks about how people went into the woods looking for this. This is their footage. We're like, oh, this whole movie is just the footage of this thing that happened. And this is the thing in the days before the internet. Well, very early internet.
Very early. It was
early
there,
internet.
but not as good.
There was not the kind of transparency there is now, where it's like, okay, you had no reason not to believe it. It's nobody filmmakers. It doesn't list a cast of stars or anything like that. It's just
the actual cast's names were the names of the actors and actresses. It was a brilliant thing to do.
And so, I mean, when it's coming out, we're like, oh, this is super interesting. I want to see what this is. And then, the movie finally came out. I traveled from where I live into Chicago. It took me an hour and a half away to go see an early screening of this because it only opened in big cities at first. And I think by the time you get partway through the movie, not even partway through the movie, from the beginning, you're kind of like, okay, this isn't real. This is clearly not real footage of this. This is just what they came up with, because they supported it with they came up with they put up fake websites and things like that. They had glimpses of Heather's supposed diary and things like that. So they did a good job of trying to project it as real, but you kind of knew in the back of your head it's not.
The marketing for this was brilliant.
Oh, it's great. Guerrilla marketing was done great, and for the time you couldn't do it today because nobody would buy it because it'd be too obvious that it's not real, and people would be you'd have
someone on the studio going, guys, this is all fake, right?
Yeah. But my thing about this movie is it is a great experiment. It was in a way a new approach to filmmaking, something new and different with the whole found footage idea, which it had been done in very limited before that. They aren't the first movie to ever do a found footage thing, but it's the big breakthrough of it. And so as an experiment, I think it is actually quite interesting. As a movie, it's boring as shit because, like you said, nothing's happening. The ending's kind of effective, but everything until then is like, oh, what was that? Okay, nothing. Let's go back to our tents. Oh, what was that sound?
It's an incredibly cheap way to make movies because you don't ever actually have to show what the fuck they're scared of because you just got to do the quick thing.
Well, and the thing is, they didn't even have a script. They had certain things they wanted to convey, maybe in a scene.
Yeah.
But everything is just completely improv, and they have the actors actually just holding the camera like they would if it was, there was found footage. So honestly, the director and writer kind of made out because they're It didn't have to do anything. This got paid for it, and the cast got nothing out of the hundreds of millions of dollars. But so as an experiment, I respect it. It's not a good movie, and it definitely should not have made all the money it made. It should not have gotten all the hype it got. So yeah, most of it easily.
And I agree. It's definitely an experience. It's something you definitely should see the first time so you can experience it. But it's more for the people who were there when it came out. Now, if you go back and try to watch it now, it's like, no, this is fucking stupid.
Oh yeah, when it came out,
we've seen it done better now.
Especially seeing it in a theater packed with people, for the first time when it was a new idea to everybody. It really was a fun experience, even if the movie itself wasn't that good. But now people are going to sit and watch it, on their computer monitor, the TV. It's going to be like, this is dumb and boring. And they're right, honestly. But
So in the moment, it was brilliant.
Yeah.
But then once you realize this isn't real, and then you try to watch it like when it got out on VHS, DVD, and stuff like that, it's like, this is not as fun.
It's not really fun for repeat viewings. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, I don't want to watch this again and again and again. Like, I remember I bought the DVD for it and I tried watching it and I was just like, why am I watching this? Like, I'm dumb for buying this DVD. Like, this was a stupid purchase. My last overrated, much like The Shining in the 1980s, this was a movie that I didn't watch all the way through until probably within the last 10 years. But I knew all the vital, important parts of it. I'd seen the important parts of it, but I never watched the in-between. Personally, this is not a horror film to me. It's not. It's a thriller, which was another big thing in the 90s as well, was that thriller kind of became the main focus and less the horror aspects. There was horror elements, but it was more a thriller film than it was horror. But this one is still classified as a horror. Some people still call this one of the best horror movies of all time, but I don't consider it one. But since it's on the list, we'll talk about it. And that's Silence of the Lambs. It's good. It's a good film. It's some, might even say great film. Anthony Hopkins is phenomenal as Hannibal Lecter. Jodie Foster is great as Clarice. Buffalo Bill, what actor's name?
Oh, I don't remember offhand.
Like, get on his damn name all of a sudden.
It is Ted Levine.
Ted Levine, thank you. Levine. I could see his face, but I couldn't fucking pull his name out. He's great in the role he did. Not for a second do I consider this a horror film. Because there's never a moment to be scared, except for maybe like the last 5 minutes when it's like night vision when she's in his house. There's creepiness in there. But people chalk this up as one of the scariest horror films of all time. And I'm just like, no, this is not a horror movie. Now, if I'm going to put this as a non-horror thriller, yes, this is a great serial killer film. And it's a thriller, it's acted performances, all that kind of stuff. But you watch it all at once, it does drag. It does drag because you think Anthony Hopkins is in this movie a lot. He's in it 13 minutes?
Something like that.
Something like that. And when he's on screen, yes, that is the best parts of the film. And when Buffalo Bill's on screen, some of the best parts of the film. But they're both not on screen a whole lot. And there's just a lot of just filler throughout. Mainly Clarice's story, which I just didn't give a shit about. So, yeah, it's not one of the scariest horror movies of all time.
I think it's a great film. But this is one I purposely left off my lists because even if it's one of its genres is listed as horror, and a lot of people say, oh, see, look, the Academy does occasionally reward horror films. It's not a horror film. It's a crime thriller. And on that aspect, it is great. But I just don't consider it horror, so I couldn't put it anywhere on the list. Yeah.
The only other one I had as an overrated, I was like, it's not. I don't think it's overrated. I just think a lot of people like it, and that was Candyman. And I was just like, it's fine. I don't like it, but I was like, that's not really overrated. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna pick Silence of the Lambs real fast. So I had to do a quick audible. Did you have another one, or was that?
That's all I have to overrated.
Okay. So going to underrated. I feel like with the 80s, our underrateds were movies that people never heard of. My underrateds, I think everyone has heard of, but maybe have not seen, or seen them and are in agreement that they like them just as much. I've got quick honorable mention. This is one of my favorite films as a kid as well. Like I said, I don't consider it horror, but it is classified as a horror. But it's a children's horror film, so I guess that's where it kind of goes into, and that is The Witches. Ron Dahl's The Witches with Angelica Houston. I watched that movie so much as a kid. I thought the practical effects of the lead witch I thought was really well done. I thought the effects with the mice in the movie was really well done. It's not the best acted at all by any means. Obviously, by the time this movie came out at Brian's age, even like, this is fucking stupid. But for me, who was like, 5-6 years old, I loved this movie, and so it's got a special place in my heart. I probably go back and watch it now, and I probably couldn't make it through it. And the remake that they made with Anne Hathaway was a fucking shit show. But yeah, that was a special little honorable mention for me. This next one, though, Brian's definitely gonna roll his eyes for. But this was another one that I watched at a younger age. I know it's stupid as shit, but I think for what this franchise is, this is my favorite one of the franchise. And I think it's the best. I think it's the best one because I think they utilized it literally to the best potential. Ernest Scared Stupid. I thought that they did a great job with this. Like, Ernest, you either love him or you hate him. But I have always been kind of like, okay, yeah, it's fucking Ernest. He's an idiot. He's klutzy and he does stupid shit. And he goes to jail and then he goes to camp and he goes to Africa, I think, at one point. Ernest Scared Stupid. I'm not gonna lie, those trolls were effective, and the stuff they did to the children in the movie, effective. Yes, Ernest is there doing stupid Ernest shit, but that movie for a kid, that was really well done. It really, really was. It's a really effective children's horror film with Ernest in the film. It's kind of like when you have Abbott and Costello. It's like, oh yeah, here's Wolfman and Frankenstein. Yeah, but Abbott and Costello are here. Okay, cool. Well, they'll add aesthetics to it, but it's actually a werewolf Frankenstein film, and they're here. It's so different if you threw like the fucking Three Stooges into a Freddy Krueger movie. It's like, it's a Freddy Krueger movie. Yeah, but here's the Three Stooges. What the fuck are they doing here? Oh, okay, that's what it is. I don't know if you ever watched this movie or not. You probably fucking hated it if you did.
I've never seen an Ernest movie at all. Yeah.
But this one actually worked for me. And not going to lie, those trolls actually kind of creeped me out a little bit. Because they basically would grab kids, and if they touched them, they turned into little, like, wooden figurines. And then they captured them and, like, put them in this magical tree, and it gave them, like, power and life. So, like, super, like, in terms of, like, supernatural, like, horror stuff. And then there's fucking Ernest who's in this movie. It's just like, how the fuck does this work? And it worked for me as a kid. But yeah, definitely Ernest Scared Stupid. What was your
first underrated movie? Is a movie that, I mean, it was a popular movie at the time. But I think it's kind of, especially when there's a horrible remake that came out in the 2010s, I think it was. And I think it's a movie that people have just kind of forgotten about largely, and that's Flatliners. Flatliners, it's got a huge cast. It's, especially at the time, Julia Roberts is just kind of breaking out to become a star. It's got Kiefer Sutherland, Kevin Bacon, Oliver Platt, who's the best part of any movie he's in.
Usually.
Usually, yeah. One of the Baldwins, Billy Baldwin's in there. Directed by Joel Schumacher. And I think it's just a very well done kind of horror thriller to it. It kind of has those supernatural aspects. This is 6 years before Scream, but it still kind of had the kind of, even if you look at the cover, it kind of has the young cast kind of all in a row there, and kind of the same aesthetic to it. It's just a movie that I really enjoyed, and while I know it was popular, I think a lot of people have largely just forgotten about it, and it's just one worth checking out. Again, not a favorite, but it's definitely underrated.
All right. My number 2, I know is a favorite of ours. But because I had 5 movies I really, really loved, I put it in my underrated. I don't consider this one underrated. I think everyone that has seen this movie actually really likes this movie. It's just more or less people may not have seen it. And we talked about it a little bit earlier, like as a little brief and miss it. We talked about it, and that's The Faculty. Okay. This was a movie. This cast is fucking amazing. This is an amazing cast. Much like we were talking about with Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer. This is a cast of people who are either not big actors yet, or they're like TV actors, or they had one really big role. I mean, you got freaking Elijah Wood, you got Jordana Brewster, you got Josh Hartnett, you got Salma Hayek, freaking Sean Halsey, you got Famke Janssen, you got Christopher McDonald, Usher, Robert Patrick, Jon Stewart. The list goes on and fucking on. This is a amazing cast. And I love this movie so fucking much. And I know Brian loves this movie too. This is probably in your top fives, maybe potentially. But like it's definitely like in the MTV era horror. In the heighten of the MTV, you have the soundtrack with this, very MTV-esque. Like I said, you have this young, great cast. They all work incredibly well together. You got effective, effects with the aliens in this movie. You got a good teacher cast of adults that work really well. It's just a cool movie. Just a really cool, well done film. Whenever this is on TV, I always watched it. I think I've bought every version of it that's come out for physical media, except for 4K. I haven't bought 4K yet. But this is one of those movies that literally it's like, oh, here comes a horror film. And then you watch it like, holy shit, this movie's fucking great. I love The Faculty.
Yeah, and this very much looked like one of those kind of Scream knockoff movies, right down to the cover art, because you have, your young, attractive cast. It seems like a movie that just was put together by a studio to cash in. Because you have your young, attractive cast. You have Kevin Williamson came back and he wrote this one as well. And he's, he does another great job here. I really did love the adult cast, so the teacher, the Salma Hayek and Jon Stewart, Robert Patrick, them, and Chris McDonald. They get used way too little, but I mean that the point of the movie.
Yeah, that's the one
focus,
negative.
The focus isn't on them. I would have liked to have seen more of them. But then Robert Rodriguez especially, because this is him coming off of Desperado, which I loved, From Dusk Till Dawn, which wasn't perfect but was still a lot of fun. And then this is kind of the last movie he did before he went off into doing his
Spy Kids,
all his kids movies and all this stuff that clearly filmed in front of his green screen in his basement or whatever he did. So this kind of his last hurrah before he kind of fell off the edge for me. But everything about that, I mean, coming off Desperado, you got Robert Rodriguez, coming off Scream, you got Kevin Williamson, you got this great cast. Everything came together to create this film that it's not in my top 5. It probably wouldn't even be in my top 10 for the decade. But I do enjoy this movie quite a bit.
What's your next one?
My next one is the one that Sean will not agree with by any means. Is a horror movie called Ravenous. Ravenous is Guy Pearce, Robert Carlyle, convicted pedophile Jeffrey Jones, David Arquette's in there. Hey, he's got a wrestler. You should like it then. A former champion wrestler, I should say. But this is a movie. It's absolutely definitely original. I think the performances in it, especially watching Robert Carlyle go over the edge, is a ton of fun. It's got a great atmosphere to it. It takes place in the wilderness, kind of isolated out in the middle of nowhere in winter. It's got original story to it. The soundtrack is, I know what pushes Sean over the edge, because it's a bizarre soundtrack done with one
of the worst scores in movie history.
But the thing is, is it score I'm going to sit and listen to on its own? No, but I think it works perfectly in the movie. I disagree with Sean on that, and he's entitled to his opinion. That's fine. But for me, it just worked, and I think just the originality of it, and again, the performances made this one one that I think more people should check out. And they might hate it too, but it's at least worth watching.
Wasn't it Civil War?
I believe it was during or just after Civil War. Yeah.
This is a movie that, cast-wise, I enjoyed the cast. I don't hate this movie if I could watch it without a score. The score is so unabashedly annoying that it took me out of the movie every time it started to play. Isn't it like a fucking it's a fiddle, isn't it? What was it?
It was using a lot of just what they would have there, like a fiddle or like a little rudimentary guitar or kind of drums, things like that.
Yeah, like a banjo fiddle shit.
Yeah.
If that was not in this movie, I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more, because the movie itself, it's about isn't it a Wendigo?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
The
that's what they
elements,
call it. It turns out it's actually like almost like more of a spirit of one, because Robert Carlyle is becoming this cannibal trying to ingest other people's life.
yeah.
And, yeah.
The
So
movie
that
itself is not bad. There's some stupid elements in it, but it's not bad by any means. But every time this fucking score came on, I just immediately was just like, oh my god! I was getting a headache listening to it. That I got angry every time this
Yes, we did.
fucking score came on. And I remember because it was like one of the very, very first episodes of Weekend Crusaders that we shot. And he made me watch this. And I think it was like right after The Vanishing or some shit. So like you were like back to back, just pissing me off.
Sounds
Like,
we're
you're
canceling this
doing
show.
this intentionally. It's like you're intentionally picking shit movies for me to hate. But I think I even said this on the episode. I was like, look, if that music wasn't in there, I probably wouldn't have hated this film. But that music outright made me hate this movie with every fiber of my being. And so I've never hated a movie's score more, or so badly wish there was a way to mute it. You know, it's like when you're playing a video game and the menu music is so bad. At least you can go into the options and turn the fucking menu music off. You can't turn the fucking score music off during a movie. And if I did, probably would actually enjoy the damn fucking film. But goddamn, this movie was annoying as shit for me. Of course you'd fucking bring it up. If it wasn't that, it would have been The Vanishing. You would have brought one of them up in this damn thing.
Actually, my next film. No, I'm kidding.
My last underrated film was a movie that I don't think I've watched it very often, but when I went back to when I was looking through my list of 90s horror, and I was like, you know what? That one I haven't watched it in a long time, but I appreciate the fuck out of what it did because it was unique and it's got 3 stellar leads. And I like the director, not as much anymore, but at the time, this dude was doing amazing things. And that's Death Becomes Her. Robert Zemeckis with Goldie Hawn, Bruce Willis, Meryl Streep. This movie is pretty great. You got Bruce Willis, Mr. Die Hard, which I didn't really know Bruce Willis is anything outside of Die Hard at that age. But you've got Bruce Willis, who's like king shit, and he's playing this like poor schlub kind of a character. I was just like, what the fuck is Bruce Willis like in this movie? And then you've got Goldie Hawn and Meryl Streep, and it's basically them just fucking each other up through this whole movie. And the practical effects of this is great. I love the setting that it's in because it's like in this big fucking mansion for pretty much the most of the whole film. This movie just hits for me. Like every aspect of it, the acting, the story of it, the way they shot the film, the way they shot the violence in the film, everything about this movie works. And I feel like a lot of people, to me, this is the epitome of underrated because I think most people, forget this movie exists. Because if you look at the filmography of Meryl Streep and Bruce Willis, I don't think people think about this movie anymore. Because Meryl Streep was still she wasn't new, but she still wasn't like Meryl Streep at that point. If anything, Goldie Hawn was kind of the bigger name at the time. Would you agree or disagree in 1992?
I think if you're looking at like popularity, Goldie Hawn was probably the bigger name at the time. Meryl Streep was more like the, Academy Award nominated prestige actress.
Yeah, but you would never have seen Meryl Streep in this kind of film, at that time. And then of course Bruce Willis, I mean, he had 2 Die Hards under his belt at this point, so I wasn't prepared to see him like this. But yeah, just everything about it, much like Little Shop of Horror, it's just like everything about this movie works. But unlike Little Shop of Horror, which is iconic for its musical numbers, this movie is just iconic for its death scenes, is the term I guess I would use for it. And it's one of those that you forget about, and then as soon as you it pops up, either you read something or you find I think this one only popped up on me, I think because a scene of it popped up on Twitter a couple weeks back. I was like, oh my god, I totally fucking forgot about this film. This movie's actually really fucking good. So yeah, it's definitely the epitome of underrated for me.
Yeah, Death Becomes Her is a fun movie. I remember seeing it at the time, and Bruce Willis at the time was my favorite actor. Coming off a couple of Die Hards and Last Boy Scout, Hudson Hawk, still a fun movie. I don't care what anybody says.
I was like, you're gonna say Hudson Hawk. I know
I
you
will
are.
say Hudson Hawk, absolutely. But I mean, this is back when Robert Zemeckis, he was always trying to be cutting edge on filmmaking and new techniques and things like that. But this is back when he did it in service to the story. He did Roger Rabbit. He did this. He did Forrest Gump. These things where he kind of had these special effects breakthroughs that in service to the story, as opposed to just when he dove in and started doing nothing but like mocap movies, or like there's a new movie coming out here where it's just some planted camera fixed in the corner for the entire movie, which I'm not sure. It seems like nothing but gimmick. But here it worked, and this is a year before Jurassic Park, so this is kind of blowing people's minds how they can do some of these things with special effects. But yeah, this was a fun movie. Good choice.
Yeah. All right, now going to our top films of horror for 1990s. What?
I saw my last.
I thought you were hitting the end point like you were done.
Nope.
Okay, go to your last underrated.
Well, you know what? I'm going to cheat a little bit. My last underrated is also my number 5, so we'll just make a transition that way. And that is a movie that's far better than the overrated Sixth Sense, and that is Stir of Echoes. This this is a movie. It's directed and written by David Koepp, who also, by the way, is the writer of Death Becomes Her. It stars Kevin Bacon, Catherine Irby, Kevin Dunn. A lot of familiar faces. You probably don't know the names unless you're really into films. I know a lot of them, but a lot of people don't. They're kind of character actors. But this is the same kind of story as Sixth Sense in that it's kind of the same creepy atmosphere. Kevin Bacon's kind of seeing this ghost. There's some kind of mystery. Something bad happened in this house, and he keeps seeing these things. And it's just a really solid atmospheric movie. Yes, it gets to be a little bit of kind of action at the end, of course, in the climax of the movie. But it's really kind of you're solving a mystery along with him. You're kind of seeing his descent into almost kind of madness, trying to figure out what's going on and why he's seeing these things. Kevin Bacon does a great job. David Koepp, who hasn't directed a lot, but I think this is the best one he has directed. The score is great to it. The look of the film is great to it. It's just a movie that a lot of people haven't seen, and I think is worth checking out.
Yeah, I remember watching it, I think, when it first came out, and I didn't think anything of it. Because I was like when Kevin Bacon was just doing weird, random stuff. And then you had me go back and rewatch this for, I think, Weekly Crusaders. And I was like, man, I remember this, but I don't remember this at the same time. And I was like, yeah, this is solid. This is a solid movie. I completely forgot about this movie. Like, I remember, but I don't remember anything. So it felt like a first time watch again when I did it. But yeah, it was definitely one that solid choice. I have two quick little honorable mentions. One is just a favorite of mine, which was Army of Darkness. Another one that was always on TV every weekend. And I love that movie so much. Ash and the Evil Dead, just made me love it even more because it continued with that kind of version of it. I will always argue that Army of Darkness is the best Evil Dead film of Bruce Campbell. Army of Darkness is the best one.
It's funny, Army of Darkness is the first one of the entire series that I saw.
Same.
And I saw it as it was my first ever bootleg movie. And because this is like 6 months before it actually finally came out and got released. I don't know where it came from, but I had to mail order this thing. I had to order this, and somebody sent me a VHS tape of this thing. I'm watching this movie I'm not supposed to see yet because it doesn't come out. And it was like, I'm not even sure all the effects were done. It was definitely like a 5th generation recording of this thing. So it was a horrible picture, but I just have some real memories. That's the first one I saw of the series.
Yeah, I definitely did not watch the first 2 Evil Dead before I watched this, and I loved Army of Darkness. Well, Evil Dead 1 and 2 were definitely way different. And I was like, oh yeah, they're okay, but Army of Darkness is the shit. Yeah. Yeah, I love Army of Darkness. The other one, I haven't watched it in a long time, but I just remember it was the biggest thing when it came out, and then people just bring it back up, and that's Interview with the Vampire. I thought, like I said, Brad Pitt was super over at that point. Tom Cruise was kind of almost like on a downtrend at that time, but then went right back up as top Tom Cruise again. You got young Kirsten Dunst, which we all know how we feel about her, but she's good in this. Antonio Banderas was a relative unknown at that point. Christian Slater, who's obviously one of Brian's faves. Just a really well done story. I have not watched the TV series, the new TV series yet, but I've heard good things. But yeah, Interview with the Vampire. It's what?
I have not seen it either.
Oh, they said it wasn't good. I was like, oh. But yeah, Interview with the Vampire is definitely one that's always kind of been fun for me. I haven't watched it in a long time, but I always enjoyed that one. But my first number 5 is a movie that most people probably had not seen. I'm pretty sure it's a Stephen King film. I want to say it's Stephen King. I'm about 99% sure it's Stephen King. But this is once again, like I said, most of my horror movies were always movies I always caught like on like UPN or CW, like on a Saturday morning thing. And this was one of those as well. And that was The People Under the Stairs. Isn't that Stephen King?
No, it's a Wes Craven movie, but it's not Stephen King.
Wes Craven. It's like one or the other. Yeah, People Under the Stairs. I have not watched this in a long time. But when I started looking through my list and I saw that, I was like, that 1,000% is going on my list. Because I love the shit out of this movie. Always caught it on TV. I remember watching that when we were doing my Summer of Horror, which if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, watch the 80s version. You guys don't know what I'm talking about on there. Cast-wise, Brandon Quintin Adams. You know, a lot of people know him from like Mighty Ducks. Ving Rhames is in this as well. It's got a solid cast. No, like, huge
For me, it was AJ Langer from My So-Called Life. I was obsessed with it.
Or Sean Whalen as well. Like I said, it's got a solid cast around it. I thought it was effective for what it was. For people who don't know literally what this movie is, when a fool breaks into a home of his family's landlords, he discovers that they have mutilated several boys and kept them imprisoned under stairs. As Fool attempts to flee, he meets their daughter Alice. Can Fool and Alice escape? That's a very random ass IMDb description of the movie. But it's very 90s. It's actually more kind of like felt very 80s aesthetic to it as well. But I really enjoyed this film when I was.
That came out. Was it like 1990 that came out? Was it 91?
Yeah, it was like right at 1990.
Very early, so it was almost an 80s.
91.
And getting a Jordan Peele produced remake, by the way.
You what?
Jordan Peele's producing a remake of it, actually.
It's Jordan Peele, so I hope it's good.
And I can see how he'll go into the whole social commentary kind of aspect to it and things like that.
Yeah,
it'll be good. My number 4, I put a horror comedy that I'm pretty sure Sean loves as well. It kind of goes along with Evil Dead because he also cuts off his hand and attacks him. It's Idle Hands.
I thought you were going one way, and then you said come here. I'm like, nope, that's not where my next movie is. My next movie is a horror comedy as well.
No, Idle Hands is it stars Devon Sawa, who most people probably know from like The First Final Destination. He was in
Little
Casper,
Giants.
you know. But more importantly, as Jessica Alba, looking gorgeous. And it's not creepy because at the time I found her gorgeous. I was closer to her age. I'm not like now looking back at her that age. Calm down. Seth Green, Eldon Henson playing like kind of the supporting roles, the best friends. Those two are hilarious together. They make a great duo. I kind of wish they had actually made more films together because they kind of worked as a good comedy duo. It's basically an even more comedic take, kind of on the same idea as like Evil Dead 2 or Army of Darkness, because he has, his hand gets possessed. He chops it off, and it's going around. Well, first it's trying to make him do things. Finally, he chops it off, and then it's off on its own, trying to kill people and things, and they're trying to stop it. I think it's a great mix of horror and comedy. It's got a great cast. I think the writing is tons of fun. This is just one of those. It's just plain fun horror comedies. This was one of the ones in the 90s I loved the most.
Yeah, much like with The Faculty, this was very an MTV horror film.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Like I said, all the hot people except for Seth Green and them there, but it's funny. It's stupid, but it's funny stupid. Like I said, Jessica Alba, just chef's kiss there. Devon Sawa, he was like very hot in the 90s. And then honestly, it was kind of like this and Final Destination were kind of his big last hurrahs. I mean, I know he's been in the Chucky TV series as well, but he was almost like unrecognizable. It's like, that fucking Devon Sawa? He's still alive?
Yeah, I know. I remember hearing he ran into like a lot of personal problems and things going on in his life. But yeah, this is kind of the peak of his 99, 2000 was kind of it for him.
I can't think of this movie and not immediately think of Seth Green because of the way he looked. Because was it Seth Green that had the bottle on his head?
Yes.
Yeah, because the other one was his head was chopped off and he had it taped, and he always tries to eat the fucking burrito, and it's just like coming out of his throat. Shit. Yeah, Idle Hands is always a fun one. I'm also kind of sticking. It's a horror comedy, but it's not as funny as I think everyone thinks of it as. But it definitely is in the dark, kind of more of a dark comedy aspect. And that's Frighteners, or The Frighteners.
Yeah, I was gonna make that an honorable mention, but I figured you'd bring it up. So there you go.
Yeah, I love this movie so much. At the time, Michael J. Fox was just like the it guy. But I mean, he always kind of like comedies, or like romantic comedies, kind of thing. Like that was like or Back to the Future. Like that was Michael J. Fox's thing. And now he's like this like scummy, kind of dirty, con man kind of thing. But you realize he's not. He actually can see ghosts in this. You got a great cast around him. You got who I always love, and I think this guy deserves more recognition. Oh God, where's his fucking name? Oh, Shy McBride. I love Shy McBride. Every time I see Shy McBride, I immediately get excited. But you got him. You got Jake Busey. You've got John Astin again. Peter Dobson. He's got a funny part in the film as well. Troy Evans. That dude is great. And then, of course, R. Lee Henry. This movie looks great, directed by Peter Jackson before people knew who the fuck Peter Jackson was. It is, I really love how this film plays out, because you have Michael J. Fox, who plays Frank Bannister, and like, yeah, he's this con man who, well, he's not even, like I say, he's not even a con man, but he's the guy they call to like exterminate ghosts. Which basically he's just in on it with the ghosts.
He is a con man, but he actually can't see ghosts.
Con man, but he actually is legit. Like he can see them, but he's working with them. And for the longest time, I always thought, oh God, was it trying to blink? Jim Fife, who plays Stewart, I always thought was what's his name from House?
Oh yeah.
You watch Frighteners, and you swear to God, you think that that's the same actor. Like, I always thought that that was the same person. Blanking on his name. Why am I blanking on his name? Help me. You're better at this than me.
Hugh Laurie.
Yeah, Hugh Laurie. I always thought Jim Fife and Hugh Laurie were the same person, and they're fucking not. Because I think it was you who told me that. I was like, yeah, it's got Hugh Laurie. And somebody like, Hugh Laurie is not in Frighteners. I'm like, yes, he is. He's like, dude, no, he's not. And I had to look it up. I'm like, motherfucker, for like ever, I thought that was a thing. Visually, this movie looks great. I think the ghosts look great, which is basically just everyone in a blue hue. But I think it worked well. The comedic aspects, where it's like, them being able to like con people in this, but the actual story that they develop through this film with like this Grim Reaper like horror character, and then you find out like who he actually is, and like the Bonnie and Clyde aspect of the story as well with Jake Busey, I thought was really well done. The whole like numbers on the forehead thing, I thought was really cool. It's just a cool, like, fun film for what it is, and it gave me another layer to Michael J. Fox as an actor, because like it was like, yes, he has his comedic like timing in this, but he had to add more to this film, and I've always loved this movie so much. It's definitely a highlight for me in the 90s. Yeah. What was your next one?
My next one is Scream 2. Scream 2
is my number 2.
One of the rare sequels that almost lives up to the original. I don't think it's quite, up there with number 1. But it managed to keep the same vibe, but it managed to give us something new to it. You got to see Sydney off of college. You're in a different setting. The characters now not only are aware of kind of horror tropes, but now they've experienced some of it. So it's kind of like, what did they learn? What didn't they learn? What same mistakes they make? Things like that. It does the whole same thing of keeping you guessing to who the killer is going to be at the end, almost to its detriment. Because the first one, you didn't see it coming. You assumed it's just some killer out there because
you thought it was Cotton.
Yeah, it was but then it turns out like, oh, it's one of them. But now by the time you hit number 2 and then on beyond, you're kind of like, okay, which one of them is it? You're kind of always like, okay, you're looking for the killer. Kind of we talk about Sixth Sense. You're looking for the twist. Who's going to be the killer? The thing is, it's never really tips its hat, and part of that is that they kind of just purposely make everybody look like it could be it. And my thing with the whole Scream franchise after the first one's kind of been like, they made 80% of the movie and then pulled a name out of a hat, and the killer is this person. Okay, let's write that ending. which is actually interesting
Not
because
wrong.
I remember Scream was such a hit, and me and my friends were so obsessed with this thing. And Scream 2 was being made, and the script leaked, and I got a hold of that script. I still have it actually printed out over there somewhere. And it doesn't have. I think the last 10 minutes of the movie is just kind of written in a paragraph because he hadn't even finished writing that yet. But so I kind of spoiled the movie for myself. But of course, they knew the script had out, so they changed the complete ending. They changed who the killers were, so it was kind of cool to see something new. But it also showed that the whole movie before it had no bearing on who the killer was going to be at the end.
So in your script, who was the killer?
Um, I want to say the roommate was in on it. I don't remember who the second. There was a second person. But it had nothing to do with
With the events of the first
mom.
film.
Yeah. But it's the writing is just as smart as it was in the first one. They not only get to poke fun at horror movies, but they also talk about the tropes of horror sequels. That's kind of the ongoing thing, is they kind of address what they're participating in, but they're also kind of committing those same crimes, but they know they're doing it. They do it with a wink. The meta aspect continues, and this came out only a year later after the first Scream.
It was a year later. Yeah,
But it kind of showed the rest of the wannabes like, look, we can still do it best, even if you're going to try and copy us. Oh, yes. and I just want to say, obviously, and also great additions to the cast. I mean, from the opening with Jada Pinkett
Smith.
Yeah.
Was it Mekhi Phifer? No, it was Omar Epps.
Yeah, and Omar Epps. Going all the way, through to Timothy Oliphant, who we love, obviously, here on the movie Crusaders. Jerry O'Connell has a small part in it, so it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, Scream 2 is my number 2. I love Scream 2. I put it like right there with Scream 1, but it's the killer that drops it down, because when you see a certain actor or actress and they've been on TV for so long, you only see them as that character, and the mom, aka the killer in that, I only know her as Jackie from Roseanne. And when I see her, I'm just like, oh, really? We picked her? Like, the one character that was, superfluous throughout the whole film. She was this annoying character that just kind of stuck around. Like, I don't buy her as the killer in this movie. And it's like, oh, wait, also Timothy Oliphant. And it's like, okay, why buy him? Like, he fits the quota, And it's like, but then, like, you throw that in, and it's like, oh, it's because she's Billy's mother. And it's like, do I care about that? I really don't. I really don't care. And they were supposed to buy that, like, no one recognized her because, she got plastic surgery and all this kind of stuff. But outside of the killer reveal, I love this movie so much. I think the cast is stronger in this because they're smarter. I think Jamie Kennedy is still firing on all cylinders in this movie. Obviously, Neve Campbell is great in this. But I think the supporting cast around it, I said Timothy Oliphant, Jerry O'Connell, David Arquette, I think is better. I think Courtney Cox is better in this one than she is in the first film, because I think they all are more comfortable in their roles, as well as the characters are more comfortable in the scenery of what's going on, because they're adaptive to this. I think the story elements between Gail, Dewey, and Sydney are stronger in this. I think the kills are better in this. I like the college aspect of it. Sarah Michelle Gellar has a small part in this film as well, so she basically gets, I Know What She Did Last Summer and Scream. She's the only one that got to do both. But I love Scream 2. I think it's one of the few horror sequels that is equal to, if not just a little bit less than the original. And it's only because of the choice that they had, which maybe if the thing hadn't got leaked, we would have had a better outcome for it. But Scream 2 is still a movie that I fondly love watching. I always watch those two kind of like in succession. So if I watch Scream, I have to immediately watch Scream 2 right after it. And then I kind of pretend Scream 3 never happened, because Scream 3 just sucks. Since that was my number 2, I'll go ahead and give you my number 3. My number 3, like I said, spoke about it. Those screams had to run, or this movie had to walk so screams could run, and that's New Nightmare. I think, once again, New Nightmare is probably, for what it does, is right there with A Nightmare on Elm Street as some of the best horror that's ever done. They take basically what everyone thinks of Freddy Krueger, and they go, you know what? Fuck that. we're changing the whole game. We're changing the mold of what Freddy Krueger is. Now Freddy Krueger is a legitimate demon. Freddy Krueger is not the funny, schlocky kind of character that he's become over the last like 5 films. This one just wants to fucking murder you. And not only that, it's coming after the actors from the very first Nightmare on Elm Street, which I loved that aspect so much. I love that they went back after 10 years and brought back the OG cast that were available to come back and do this. I love the aesthetic that they went with it. I love that they even brought fucking Wes Craven into the movie, and he's not a good actor, but I love that he was there for it because they tried to make this thing as real as it could possibly be for this. Wasn't the kid actor the one from Pet Sematary?
Yeah, Miko Hughes. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, wasn't he in this? And he's better acting in this one than he was in Pet Sematary, guys. He grew up and he got a little bit better. I thought the kills were a lot stronger. I like that Freddy didn't look quite like himself because this is not the same Freddy. So I like that his face did not look the exact same. I love that he kind of wore something similar, but he had like the trench, like the wasn't a trench coat. Was it? Yeah, it was a trench coat.
Yeah.
He had like the trench coat and the hat, but like his like sweater was like slightly colored, off changed. I liked that his glove, it wasn't like really a glove, it was kind of like a bony kind of like attachment to his hand. I love what they did with this. I thought it was a unique new approach to the Freddy Krueger character that changed the aspect of the game of what Nightmare on Elm Street was. Not everyone was ready for it at that time. I think people who watch it now probably would love it now for what it was, but at the moment, it just felt like a cash grab for the Nightmare on Elm Street because people were not ready for the meta-ness of it. Now, once Scream and all that stuff started, I think people could look back at Nightmare on Elm Street and kind of appreciated it more because it is the one that started it, and then Scream kind of, perfected it. But yeah, I think New Nightmare is probably criminally underrated because I don't think people give it a fair shake for what it is, but it is one of my favorites of Wes Craven's because of, like I said, it is, if this did not work for what it was, I don't know if Scream would have happened.
Yeah, it's because I think this is definitely underrated, and I do enjoy it. It's my second favorite of the series, probably after the first film. And I think that people at the time, like, not only weren't ready for it, but I think that a lot of people just didn't get it. They're like, wait a minute, she's dead. Oh wait, she's playing an actress. Wait, she's playing herself. So like what? And people just didn't understand it. And I think that's one of the brilliance of it. Because like I said, by that point, the Nightmare on Elm Street series had gotten tired, and they even did Freddy's Dead. They killed him off. And they decided to bring him back, but instead of just trying to cash in another one, they're like, let's take a different approach to it. And I think it's really well done. I think it's really smartly done. I love the way it's written. I love that even at the end, you have she's reading a script. There's the script about the movie, which is about a movie making that the movie people start. It's like Inception, it's like levels of meta going into it. And so, it's really well done. And the fact that it wasn't like Kevin Williamson came on board and wrote Scream and Wes Craven directed. This is Wes Craven wrote this himself, and I think that he found a brilliant way to kind of reinvent it. And I'm glad they didn't try to make New Nightmare 2, New Nightmare 3. I'm glad they're like, this is where we'll just end it
until they come back with Freddy versus Jason, and then we're back to schlocky Freddy. But yes,
but at least they was adding something new to it because they couldn't make that, because everybody always wanted to see that face off, but they were different studios. But then once the New Line bought up the rights to Freddy from Paramount, it's like, okay, now we can put them together. And
like I said, that's my favorite one because I love the aspect of the verses. But yeah, I love that they didn't try to I love that they did it with the old school version of Freddy. They didn't try to make it New Nightmare Freddy. That's what I'm saying. Like I'm glad that New Nightmare is kind of its own singular thing.
My number 2 is maybe more of a thriller, but it is listed as a horror movie, so I'm going to count it. Another Stephen King movie, and this one's Misery, 1990. Misery is a movie I went into with almost no expectations. I mean, I wasn't a James Caan fan. I'd seen him in some movies here and there, but I don't love Godfather or anything like that. Kathy Bates, nobody knew who Kathy Bates was, although she had some acting credits, but in small parts. Rob Reiner was directing it, who, last thing we'd seen from him was like Princess Bride or something. So it's like, okay, this is a weird, him doing a, Stephen King horror film. But I went and saw this one and I just fell in love with it immediately. I think it's a one of those movies that, again, could be done as a play. I think it has been done as a play since then. But what makes this movie is Kathy Bates. She rightfully won an Academy Award for her part here because she plays this person who on the surface is just like this, you know, happy-go-lucky, you know, caring woman who wants to take care of her favorite author. She's a little bit of an obsessed fan, but that's all it is, you know. But then, you know, she always kind of plays it where you kind of there's these moments where you get a glimpse of like, no, there's something underneath. There's something brewing. She is not just, you know, obsessed fan. Eventually, it turns out she's like a complete, you know, psychopath. You realize, you know, what she's capable of, what you know, how much danger he's actually in. He's not saved. He's actually just kind of a hostage, a prisoner here. And then, of course, that one scene, the iconic hobbling scene, which, you know, watching that in the theater, I remember just everybody cringing at the whole scene. I mean, from the whole, there's like a whole scene of her giving that speech about the workers of the diamond mine and explaining what hobbling was. And it just kind of builds up and builds the anticipation. Then when you see her do it and you hear the crunching of the bone, and then, you know, she goes back for the other one. And it's just that scene is so iconic in this. And I think it's so effective. And I just think it's a great horror movie in terms of just like, you know, a psychological kind of cat and mouse game of this person who, you know, he needs to try and get out, but he's, you know, injured, he's, you know, bedridden, he's in the middle of nowhere. And I thought it was a very well done film. This is back to when Rob Reiner, you know, he has on this great run, you know, of films, but it's kind of, you know, ended soon thereafter because he kind of, you know, fizzled out. But this is a great film.
I still have never seen this movie.
Wow, really?
I still have never. It's one of those. It's like I know the scene that everyone talks about. I've seen the scene, but I haven't seen anything else.
The rest of the film is definitely worth seeing. That's just the most well-known scene. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw. I've never seen Misery, so I really can't. I can't add anything to it. Our number one's the same, obviously. And like I said, we already talked about it pretty thoroughly. You know, going into the beginning of the episode, and that's Scream. I mean, like I said, it rejuvenized the whole genre. It brought horror back to light in the late, you know, mid to late 90s. And because of that, horror's still going strong. Like I said, it has its peaks and its valleys. Like I said, we had the meta slasher stuff, and then we went to the found footage. But then now we're getting back to the slasher aspects with Scream, you know, 5, 6, and 7 now back up to the forefront. This is a franchise that is so beloved that even when a version of it sucks, like Scream 3, people still are going to flock to see this movie. I remember when Scream 5 was coming out, you were like, do people still want to see this? Like, are people still care? And it's like, oh shit, they do. And it's now starting pretty much up again. It's going strong. And
well, that's the great thing is because like Scream came out in 96, Scream 2 they pumped out into 97, so it went out right away. Scream 3 was like 2000. Then it's like an 11-year gap before 4, and then like another 14-year gap before you get to 5. But now it's kind of back in its stride again.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, it all started, you know, here. And like we said earlier, young upstart cast. You know, you got, like I said, Jamie Kennedy, Nev Campbell, Courtney Cox, David Arquette, Matthew Lillard, Skeet Ulrich, Rose McGowan. I was like, why am I not thinking of her name? It's a cast that most of the cast, when you get a bunch of young people together, you can feel like they're just kind of all thrown in. And much like with the Faculty earlier, this cast felt very lived in. And what I mean by that is they all flowed. Their chemistries all flowed well together. When you watch the scene with them all hanging out and talking and bullshit with each other, you believe that these people actually hung out and they had like their shorthands with each other. They were able to, you know, bust each other's balls, and it didn't feel like acting. They just felt like, yeah, no, these people have known each other for a few years now. They're all friends, or especially
I think Matthew Lillard, because that role could be very cartoony and over the top and a caricature. But it's like we all watch and like, yeah, I know a guy like that.
Yeah, same thing with Jamie Kennedy, with him in the movie Fanatics thing. I was like, we're all Jamie Kennedy in this movie, to an extent, whether it's higher or lower. And you know, I mean, they had so many iconic lines and moments. You know, it's like the part with Skeet up on in her window. He's like, a little R-rated action. How about some PG-13? Stuff like that. Like I said, the kills are fresh. They're like I said, and the great thing about it too, the twist of it all is everyone thought the lead was Drew Barrymore because she was the biggest name. And they fucking killed her off right in the fucking beginning. You're just like, what? Yeah, like all anyone knew Nev Campbell for was Party of 5. you know, and then her and Jennifer Love Hewitt, they both go, hey, we're going to do horror this year. And no one expected Neve Campbell to be the fucking lead of this. Everyone expected, you know, she was going to be one of the got killed off. No, it's Drew Barrymore. I was like, oh, here's Drew Barrymore's comeback. You're right, it was a comeback.
And the poster has Drew Barrymore's face.
Yeah, exactly. It is the comeback, but she dies in the first 10 minutes. But just literally, like, this is easily one of the best openings to a horror film of all time. It sets the table without giving anything away. It sets the parameters and the rules of this movie without giving anything away. These are not monsters. These are regular, just people who are using the horror genre to their advantage. They're literally two people who have the cheat code because they watched the movies. And that was the brilliance of this movie. And then even when you get to the end where they deliver their motives for it, it's like, oh my God, not only do they have the horror code, they have mainstream cheat code. They know what's going to happen. They want to get caught eventually. They want to do all this stuff and then get caught. And they want to go through the trial. And they want to become famous for this. Like, you don't get, you know, these killers and stuff like that. Like, and all the ones prior that are human killers, they're serial killers, but they're not doing it because they want to be famous. They're doing it because they have the need to kill. They just become infamous because of it. No, fucking Stu and Billy, their whole motive was, hey, you want to become famous? Cool, let's do it like this. Hey, Sydney's mom fucked my dad over, literally, and let's focal point on this, and then let's get caught and let's do this. Like, it's very hard to go, hey, I want to do this, and then let's get caught. Like, to have that mindset and be in the same, you know, goal for that, it's brilliant, the writing of this, which once again is when we realize that horror can actually be really good writing and not just there for the blood and gores. You can actually have a really well done film with a great cast, great writing behind it. And Scream was the launching pad for that. Now, it doesn't mean that there weren't movies like that prior, but those movies didn't launch the genre back into the, you know, hemisphere like Scream did. And it's amazing when you go back and watch it. Because, like, you watch it now, people who never watched Scream or weren't alive when Scream came out, they watch it and they're probably just like, yeah, it's okay. I was like, no, you don't understand what Scream did. And without Scream, horror would still be around, but it maybe wouldn't have gotten to these levels. Or maybe the stuff that we're getting now, we wouldn't have gotten there without Scream, you know, or Wes Craven himself. Because, like I said, New Nightmare started it and Scream, you know, perfected it. But yeah, Scream is a masterpiece at what it sets out to do. And that's why it will probably always be our favorite 90s horror film. Anything you want to add?
No, we've covered this through the whole episode, but yeah, but number one by a mile.
Scream, let's put it this way. Scream, not only just on this episode, we have talked about Scream ad nauseum on this channel. I think, didn't we do a Scream walkthrough before, like, Scream 5 came out? Didn't we do, like,
probably, yeah.
I think we did. Every time we get news on Scream, which, hey, news on Scream, we got a release date for the next Scream film. It's in 2026. February 27th, I think is what they said. So, like, we always bring up Scream on this channel. It was like, so, shocker that it's both our number ones of the 90s. But yes, that is the horror decade of the 90s. If you guys enjoyed this episode, hit that like, share, and subscribe button to the channel so you guys stay up to date with all the latest videos pop up on the Movie Crusaders. And of course, we have to follow us on all the social media outlets you see below. Let us know in the comments below, what was your favorite horror of the 90s? What was your underrated and overrated films of the 90s as well? Let us know if you agree or disagree with what we thought with that. Coming up next, we're going to be back here to talk about the 2000s. Definitely a different landscape now. The meta-ness still there, not quite as strong. Found footage still going strong, whether we like it or not. But there were some new elements brought to horror that changed the landscape once again. And we're going to be talking about that on an episode, as well as our underrated, overrated, and top films of the 2000s. Coming up next as well, we've got Terrifier 3 and Saturday Night coming out this weekend, so we will definitely be seeing those. I hope to see both of them this weekend. I know I'm definitely seeing Terrifier 3. Saturday Night I hope to see this weekend as well. If not, it'll be next weekend. But we will definitely probably both have reviews for that coming up on the channel as soon as we see it. And then the following week we've got Smile 2, which you and I are both kind of I don't know if we want to see Smile 2, but Naomi Scott's definitely a good reasoning to go see Smile 2. Outside of that, we got Goodrich, and that's basically it for next week. But
Yeah, there's Anora, which is that one actually looks fairly good for an A24 movie. And Woman of the Hour, Anna Kendrick's directorial
yes,
debut.
I actually watched that trailer today. I'm actually super intrigued by that. It's on Netflix. Really want to see what that one's going to be like. But we will be back here next time to
more
talk.
importantly, the day before that, next week, on Thursday the 17th, The Shadow Strays, new film from Timo Tirahanto, I believe it's how it's pronounced, who did The Night Comes for Us.
Is that going to be Netflix or is that going to be
No.
theaters?
Yeah, Netflix.
Okay, cool. So we might be doing some talks on that because if there's one thing that Brian and I both love to talk about, it's The Night Comes for Us on Netflix. So is this going to follow that same path, or are we going to just pretend it didn't exist? Stay tuned. We'll find out. And come back here next week for the horror decade of the 2000s. We are the Movie Crusaders. I'm Sean Wasker. That is Brian Michaels. Until next time, in case we don't see you, go watch the movies and go have some fun.
You're still here. It's over. Go home.